The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
The Buccaneers snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast.
This was an ugly game after that first quarter. I had a couple people give me grief on Twitter about how I said this was going to be an ugly, nasty, low-scoring game, and then it started to look like it was going to be a shootout, and instead it was a nasty, ugly, low-scoring game. I mean, the quarterbacks were sacked a combined 7 times. Neither one turned the ball over, although Levante David dropped a sure pick that I'm sure he wishes he had back. But for this, the biggest moment was on 4th and 10 from their own 32-yard line and just a minute and 24 seconds remaining in the game. Baker Mayfield was looking for someone downfield. He had no one open. Then he takes off and runs for 15 yards and a first down. That was the ball game. That was it. You convert, you give yourself a chance. You miss it, the game's over. Baker, for as beat up as he was, we saw him grab his left leg after a sack in the first half. We saw him scramble and run and go down and grab his leg again. And then, of course, C.J. Gardner-Johnson wants to run off at the mouth, and that popped Baker right back onto his feet to jaw right back. But he put the team on his back once again and found a way to keep them alive. That was absolutely huge. After that, it was a completion to Cade Otton, a completion to Bucky Irving, another completion to Bucky Irving, a completion to Mike Evans, a completion to Cade Otton, and then the touchdown run by Rachaad White. After that first down run by Baker on 4th and 10, you just knew in your gut that Baker and the Bucs were going to find a way to win this game. And let me say this. While we're watching Josh Grizzard learn and grow as an offensive coordinator and a play caller, in the first 2 weeks of his career of an OC, the way he has been able to orchestrate and dial up the right plays in the first 2 weeks of this season to allow the Bucs to come from behind and win late in the fourth quarter is impressive. That is a sign of things to come, and he is not playing with a full deck right now. There is no Tristan Wirfs. There is no Luke Goedeke that I'll talk about in just a second. You don't have Chris Godwin. You don't have Jalen McMillan. Emeka Egbuka, you saw him on the sideline getting his leg wrapped up. I think that affected his play in the second half. He left a couple of plays out there. You are dealing with a lot of problems on this offense. But when it comes down to the most important moments, when it comes down to crunch time and the gotta have it drive, Grizzard and Baker have stepped up and done exactly what they needed to do to get the Bucs in the win column, and that has been huge. I think that's a great sign for what Josh Grizzard is going to bring the rest of the season as an offensive coordinator. I think it's a great sign about the trust and the belief that he and Baker have in one another to get done what they need to do. So I needed to give a little bit of a hat tip to Josh Grizzard. It was ugly on offense for a lot of the game, but that's not totally on Grizz. That was on the situation. But when it mattered most, they were able to get it done. But we do have to talk about these injuries. Luke Goedeke, I said in my live show, my live preview, that if Goedeke didn't play in this game, I felt like the Texans were going to win. Well, Goedeke leaves after re-aggravating that foot injury. And I started to think, I don't know if this Bucs offensive line can hold up against this Texans pass rush. Baker was sacked 4 times. He was hit multiple times. He was under duress for much of the game. So it was really, really spotty there for a while. No word on Goedeke's status. I have to think that he's probably, if he leaves with an injury on a Monday night, I have to believe that he's likely not going to be available to play on Sunday against the Jets. We're going to have to wait and see. But then the big one, Kalijah Kancey. His arm was in a sling after the game. Bowles told the media that it looks like it might be serious. I looked, when the injury happened, you saw the replay. He was going, and then all of a sudden his arm just went completely limp. He's trying to, push and force his way past an offensive lineman, and it almost looked like his arm was just completely dead. Kind of like when you dislocate your shoulder and you can't move your arm around. That's what it looked like. So if it's a torn pec, and we dealt with this with Christian Izien, I believe it was Izien that had the torn pec during training camp, a normal tear, a moderate tear, I guess is what it was called, you're looking at about a 12-week recovery. If it's severe, he's done for the year. It's over. That's a 4 to 6 month recovery. So you're hoping, best case scenario, that this is a moderate tear and that he's going to be able to return in about 3 to 4 months, which would be just in time for the, probably the last week or two of the regular season, but back for the playoff push. But this is bad. Kalijah Kancey is so good when he is available, when he's on the field, and he and Vea are such a good duo. But Kancey has not been able to stay healthy throughout his career. He has missed multiple games every single year. It's not his fault, but when you're looking at the team as a whole and you see a guy that you cannot rely on to stay on the field because he does keep getting injured, that's a problem. That is a serious, serious problem. So fingers crossed that we are going to get some good news about Kalijah Kancey and that it's not the worst case scenario and that there will be some hope that he's able to return before the season is over. But look, for a game that started off looking like it was going to be a shootout, this one was dominated by the defenses after they settled into the game. 7 combined sacks, and then the teams combined for 13 penalties and 90 penalty yards. It was ugly, just like last week was ugly. But an ugly win is better than a pretty loss. So I know all of you are excited that once again the Buccaneers have started off 2-0. Hopefully they actually start 3-0 this time. They get the Jets this week, but with as beaten and battered and bruised as they all are, that's going to be an interesting matchup. We're going to have to see these injury reports as they start to roll in. I want to jump into the chat. Lakita says Malk was limping as well. Yeah, I mean, that Houston front four is so incredible and so talented that they were really having their way with the Bucs offensive line for most of that game. But yeah, I got to agree with Fausto in here. Heck started slow, but ultimately had a big game. I would agree. The very first snap that Heck was on the field, he got absolutely torched. I believe it was Will Anderson that was lined up against him, and it was a full-blown Matador Olay. Just let him go right on by. And that, to me, that was a bad sign. So I liked the way that Heck was able to bounce back and really start to settle in and find his rhythm and his groove. Liam, pass rush looked good on third down. It had its ups and downs. I'm going to talk more about the pass rush in just a little bit. So I love that you brought that up. So it was very up and down. But I thought Bowles really started to find the right combination in the second half to stifle what Houston was able to do offensively. Richard in the chat, Kancey feels like Gerald McCoy 2.0. I don't know if I'm going to fully agree with that. I think Kancey's upside is much higher, but I also think Gerald McCoy doesn't exactly get the recognition and the respect that he probably deserves for as well as he played on some really, really just god-awful, terrible football teams. So, again, fingers crossed that we're going to get some good news about Kalijah Kancey here in the next day or two.
Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's a 401k or properties or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts to Monarch and immediately spotted a few subscriptions I wasn't even using. Canceling those all can save you money every month. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL.
New quarterback, no problem. The Chargers absolutely dominated the Raiders and Geno Smith on Monday Night Football and now sit 2-0.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers for 10 seasons now, but this is our 8th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, especially on the late live show edition of the Locked On Chargers podcast. But to make sure you never miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, the defense dominated. The Chargers are 2-0.
Yes, they are. Not only are they 2-0, but they're 2-0 in the division as well. Two big victories. In the first game, it was mostly about the offense. In this game, it was about the defense absolutely dominating and keeping the Raiders out of the end zone completely.
Yeah, it's exactly kind of what you hoped for this defense, especially after Geno Smith lit up the Patriots secondary last week, put up almost 400 yards, and you're like, man, maybe this is an offense they should be afraid of, but they were not. And I thought it was especially impressive the fact they lost Khalil Mack, were able to rally around that and really not skip a beat. But it was Deion Henley, it was Derwin James that were leading the way, the other captains stepping up in his absence, which was really awesome. Tarheeb Steele was also great. And the Chargers, now, even only through 2 weeks, are atop the AFC West. So we're going to have to talk about that. Also talk about the offense, the good parts of it and the bad parts of it, and also talk about Khalil Mack getting injured, something that looked pretty serious in the moment. We'll see what happens, but a big loss for this Chargers team. But I do want to tell everyone that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. David, the Chargers offense had some frustrating moments in the second half, but the defense just continued to answer the bell one time after another, and you're like, how long can they keep it up? Well, they kept it up the entire game. I mean, they absolutely dominated Geno Smith, who had a passer rating of 37 in this game. And I mean, there are individual performances that we'll talk about, but just overall, I mean, Jesse Minter is gone after this season, bro. I mean, this was a total domination by that side of the ball, just absolutely beating up the Raiders all night.
He absolutely put on a masterclass performance against the Raiders, and it was beautiful to watch. We're talking about 3 interceptions, 15 passes defense, which
That's
is
crazy.
crazy.
I didn't see that. That's nuts.
3 sacks, 5 QB hits, no touchdowns allowed, and this phenomenal stat from Next Gen Stats, Geno Smith did not complete any of his 12 pass attempts over 10 yards downfield against the Chargers, throwing 3 interceptions on those passes. That is straight up dominance, blanket coverage. They could not do anything. The Chargers married that pass rush with the coverage, and it was a sight to behold all night long.
Yeah, and I mean, this was, an improved offense for the Raiders. So, even with the banged up Brock Bowers, still, one of the top players, top receiving options in the league. Kobe Myers, a great receiver. Ashton Genty even had his moments in this one. Yeah. It just didn't matter. And this is the type of performance by the Chargers defense that lets you believe a little bit that maybe they can recreate their top scoring defense, or at least be one of them on the top of the NFL, now giving up only 15 points per game through 2 games. And I mean, it started the first play of the game. Alohi Gilman breaks on a ball, forces one up, and Deion Henley is able to come down with the interception. Then you have Tony Jefferson picking off a ball deep and just great coverage, great heads-up play by him to get in on the action, reading the route the entire way. And then you also have Derwin James. When the Raiders were making a push late in this game, he finds a way to perfectly mirror Jacoby Myers and force another turnover in the end zone to Dante Jackson. But what about the locked-on Chargers bump that Deion Henley got in this game? I mean, if I were him, I'd probably want to come back on the show every single week for the rest of the season because, man, after Mekhi Becton was questionable last second against the Chiefs, we had deja vu on Monday when all of a sudden after Denzel Perryman gets placed on injured reserve, you see that Deion Henley is now questionable for this game. And it's like, man, Denzel, they have the depth to overcome. Deion Henley is one of the best players on this defense and one of the best linebackers in the league, period. And all he did, David, was go out and have his flu game on Monday night, absolutely packing the stat sheet. He was awesome against the Raiders.
Deion Henley was everywhere, and the stat sheet absolutely describes that beautifully. 10 tackles, 2 passes defensed, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, an interception, and a QB hit. It's just Deion Henley for you right there. The guy can do it all. There's nothing he can't do on that football field from the linebacker position. You need him to go cover somebody and lock them down. He can do it. You need him to spy on the quarterback and make sure that he can't get away. He can do it. If you need him to get a big stop, to get an interception, he can do it. Deion Henley, the repeat Locked On Chargers guest. What a performance. Way under the weather, going out there and playing his absolute best football when his best was required. That's captain type of performance stuff right there.
Yeah, it's all pro type of stuff. It's definitely Pro Bowl type of stuff. To say the least. And I mean, you could see him. He looked physically different on the sideline. Not the dude who showed up for our show last week, that's for sure. So to have that, and I mean, it's just the way it happens too. Obviously, the interception's a heads-up play, being in the right place at the right time and making a play. But the 4th down sack that he got with the offense kind of reeling, the Raiders still having a chance to get back in the game, Deion waited for his opportunity. He found the gap. He shot it at an unreal speed, right, and got to Geno Smith quickly for a turnover on downs. And the big thing is also just like last year, he had an interception and a sack for the season. He didn't get it until he has 2 interceptions against the Raiders and none against anybody else. But he has now 2 sacks and an interception through 2 games. He has leveled up, which is crazy because of how well he played last year. Can't wait to see what he does when he's fully healthy next week against the Broncos. But let's also talk about the captain, Derwin James, the vocal leader of this group, who was just an animal on Monday night and deserves his flowers as well because he was great.
7 tackles, 2 passes defensed, including that spectacular tip in the end zone where he just got his head around at the perfect time, tipped it up to allow Dante Jackson to finish it off with the interception. The pressure that he was able to cause, the fact that they were using him to be able to open things up for Khalil Mack, who was able to get a sack in this game. And of course, we'll talk about that and the impact of that later on in the show. But Derwin James was everywhere. He showed you why he is quite simply one of the best defensive players in the league tonight because he can do it all, and he did it all for the Chargers defense tonight.
And I mean, you have Jim Harbaugh after the game saying he's the best safety that he's ever seen. But yeah, I mean, on that play, playing dime linebacker to just perfectly mirror Jacoby Myers and just take away the entire passing lane, getting your head around in time to break it up, getting Dante Jackson his first interception in Bolts was awesome to see. But the other one, you're totally right. I mean, totally opened up a sack for Khalil Mack. They're running a little game. He just launched the tackle, opened up a wide open lane for Khalil Mack, who doesn't miss when he gets
fun
that
to watch
close,
him,
especially
man. It's fun to
against
watch
his
him.
former team. He just doesn't miss those opportunities. But even another play, he had a blitz earlier in the game where he just blows up a running play in the backfield. Ashton Genty doesn't even get touched, but he's tripped 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage because of the chaos that Derwin was making in that backfield. But one last shout out here, Tarheeb Still. Just some awesome open field tackles. One on Brock Bowers. Blew up a screenplay to Ashton Genty for a 5-yard loss. Couple of great pass breakups as well. Tarheeb Still, we knew he could be a ball hawk. We didn't know he would have the physicality and the ability to make big plays in the open field like he showed tonight.
9 tackles, a tackle for loss, and 2 passes defense for Tarheeb Still. And the most beautiful thing for me, which I think just shows the maturation and the growth in his game was the ability to really hone in on those open field tackles and get those guys on the ground. We saw those same exact plays go for 30 and 40 and 50 yards last year, and it's not happening this year. That's showing a guy that's dedicated to fixing his mistakes and improving his game, and he showed why we think he is going to be one of the better young corners in the NFL before too long.
The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits how I like to bet. Player props, same-game parlays, jumping in live as the action unfolds. It's quick, easy, and the best way to avoid your malaise on a Sunday when your team's not on. Add a little more energy to your Sunday. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet.
Turf Toe has this cute, innocuous name, but actually it's just the worst.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast.
We can say definitively, James, that Turf Toe sucks. It is the worst.
Yeah, that's right. The Turf Toe is you're right though about the name. They need to change the name. Turf Toe sounds like a minor thing, and it can be minor at times, but it's super painful. And even when you aren't one of the 2% that need surgery, it's it's not fun, and it keeps you out for a while. And unfortunately for Joe Burrow, I mean, I don't know about you, Jake. I'm not holding out hope. Like, holding out hope is the wrong thing. Of course you hold out hope, but I'm not realistically thinking that we're going to see Joe Burrow again in a Bengals uniform at any point this season, and certainly not in this calendar year. That's how I'll do it. Like, I'm not thinking about that December 14th game against the Ravens or in that range. Like, I'm not doing that. I think we've seen the last of Joe Burrow in 2025 and probably the last of him this season.
The idea that this could be as little as 3 months feels very optimistic. That is the short end. And the caveat to give there is that this injury requiring surgery is particularly rare for quarterbacks. It's rare in general. It's especially rare for quarterbacks. There was a Harvard study that looked at all turf toe injuries in a range that ended in 2017, in which 4 of the turf toe NFL injuries they looked at were quarterbacks. None of those needed surgery, which led to this idea that this is unprecedented for quarterbacks to have a turf toe that requires surgery. That's not the case. Patrick Mahomes just had it after the 2020 season, after the 2021 Super Bowl. 3 days later, he had surgery to repair turf toe that he played through and worsened, thus requiring, I think, that surgery. So definitely not something that you can play through for a long period of time. They did it with Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. It made the toe worse. He recovered fine. Patrick Mahomes, soft tissue, seems to recover great. We've seen that from him with the high ankle sprain, saw it with him with the turf toe, where he was ahead of schedule. But ahead of schedule for Patrick Mahomes meant that having that surgery a couple of days after that Super Bowl on February 3rd, he was ready to do some stuff, was the quote, for OTAs in late May. And he was good to go for training camp. But being ahead of schedule was February, March, April, end of May, nearly 4 months to do, quote, some stuff in OTAs. So what we don't know here is the difference in the severity of the damage between Patrick Mahomes, which required surgery, and Joe Burrow, which is going to immediately require surgery. But it wouldn't be crazy to assume that Joe Burrow's injury, at least initially, was worse because Joe had no illusions of playing through it, where Patrick Mahomes managed to do so for 2.5 weeks. That's speculative, but I think could be a reasonable deduction. 3 months would be awesome. We would take that. And we could talk about what that would look like and what Jake Browning would have to do to keep the Bengals afloat and all those things. But it does feel optimistic. I agree.
Yeah, it does. Now, a couple of things. One, we know Joe Burrow is as tough as they come. I've probably listened to as much about Joe Burrow and read about it as much about Joe Burrow as I humanly possible, probably. And I know Jimmy Burrow has said this multiple times, his father. Well, Joe's always been a fast healer. So that's always been a thing where he's going to push. I think his mindset is going to be to return this year. I'm hopeful that we'll hear from Joe at some point this week. As of now, and we're recording this on Monday at 4 Eastern, there's not a surgery date set. They're still evaluating that part of it. And that's a big part of it too. When does he actually have the surgery? Because once you have the surgery, then you can start to recover. And until then, well, it's going to, there's just time burning. But I think there's a reason why, and Zach alluded to this a little bit and mentioned it. Like, there's a reason why they can't just do it right now and get the show on the road. So hopefully it's soon. Hopefully he can have surgery soon. Hopefully we hear about his mindset and approach. But it's just a bummer. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just such a bummer, Jake, because if you would have told me, and we recorded our last show together, I did the emergency show this morning, but our last show together after the game, even if you said 2 months, well, you're like, all right, well, there's a realistic path that the 2-0 Bengals could be relevant in 2 months without Joe Burrow. But when we're talking about 3 months being optimistic, and honestly, for me, and I don't want to speak for you, but I would say 4 months is semi, like there would be a chance then. Let's say they're 11-6 and going to the playoffs, and we're going really orange and black colored tinted glasses with that. But like, could Joe play that third week of January? Well, like, there might be a realistic shot at that, but that's so far away. Like, they have to be so good as a team to get to that level, to get to that spot, that it's tough to see right now on September 15th when your franchise quarterback and the organization basically goes down and could potentially be out for the season.
Yeah, it is a bummer. Feels like an understatement. It's frustrating. It's infuriating. It's tragic. It's devastating. This team can win games with Jake Browning, but I don't think that, barring some renaissance from Browning, some reinvention of self, some massive development, the like 0.0001% chance that he has a Tom Brady like breakout, like, that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about them being relevant in January. I think they can win games with Jake Browning, sure, but that's because they have these other stars on offense, and Jake Browning has the competency to get the ball to those guys. But like, yeah, I mean, we're talking about the engine of the team, and how many times have we said it throughout this offseason? Joe Burrow is the thing that drives this team. Without Joe Burrow, yeah, they still have talent. There's still guys that know how to win. But when you're talking about true contenders, it's a way that I've often joked about the Steelers over the years. Like, yeah, the Steelers are going to win some games, but who cares? Like, that's not where you're quite jumping to here, I would say. But like, unless Joe Burrow comes back, that is where I land ultimately.
Sure. Yeah, they're not going to suck. I think they're going to be fun. They may win this week. They may go to Minnesota and win. But when you enter the season, like a lot of our viewers and listeners, and that a lot of people in the building, and I'm at Paycor Stadium right now, it's called the Jungle Lounge, right next to the Bengals locker room. But when you're thinking Lombardi and you hear about the Santa Clara Standard and everything that we've heard over the past couple of months and off season, and when they signed Jamar and T, and Joe has the best training camp he's had, and really good in the preseason when they score 4 touchdowns in 5 possessions. Even if they do suck right now on offense overall, and they did in the majority, 3 out of the 5 quarters that Joe was under center, I would say they were under par, we'll say. You still had that belief that they'd figure it out and be one of those teams to reckon with. And now the margin for error is so much thinner with Jake Browning versus Joe Burrow.
Absolutely is. It's week 2 as well. I mean, I guess if you're going to have a long-term injury, getting it out of the way earlier in the season than later in the season is something. At least they're 2-0. All those things we were talking about yesterday, though, about like maybe there's enough cushion at 2-0 for them to absorb this. That's when you're thinking like maybe it's a 6-week injury. Maybe it's a grade 2 that needs time but doesn't need surgery. But then as soon as it's like, yeah, those ligaments are torn, there's a surgical intervention required, the tone certainly shifts.